What's good, my pack rats? Pac-Man Case here, and guys, I was just sent the D6 wireless fighting gamepad from Retro Fighters. I have been an ambassador with them for a really long time. I love their products. We use them at our store, but this is new. As a huge fighting game fan, and especially one of the Dreamcast, let's see if this one holds up. So with a controller like this, I'm looking for three things for the most part, and that is, what does it look like? What does it feel like? And the performance. If it can hit three of those categories, then I feel like we have a good controller on our hands. First up is the look. I have always loved Retro Fighters packaging. They always have some of the best looking boxes as well as display. That always looks really good at the store. But the biggest thing is, how does this thing look when it's outside of this package? Oh, that already feels fantastic. They've always done a really good job when it comes to their build quality on this too. Now this controller screams Dreamcast. You've got that off-white mixed with the original Dreamcast colors. The logo on the front, the D6, the 6 looks like the Dreamcast logo. So I think they put a lot of elements into this one in the way that it looks. But the first thing I thought about when I saw this controller is that it took heavy inspiration from the Japanese style Saturn controller. Same look, roughly same kind of color scheme, all the same button placement, and that's kind of what you're looking for, the face buttons themselves to be readily accessible, and that's what they did with this controller. So from a first glance look, this controller is pretty. As a one-word statement, the controller is pretty. It's clean, it's sleek, the design is awesome, and I'm all for it when it comes to look. Next up is the feel on this guy. There's a couple things that first come to mind. I am a bigger guy, I've got bigger hands, and so using a controller like this sometimes can be uncomfortable, but this specific one feels really nice in the grips. It kind of contours to your hand. The game controller itself isn't too heavy, but the huge feature when it comes to the feel is that they have now included an 8-way click stick like the classic Neo Geos on this D-pad, which is super satisfying to press down. This is super satisfying on the 8-way, especially to do like a move like Zangief where you have to do a 360. And then they incorporated that back into all of the buttons. So your X, Y, and Z buttons and your A, B, and C buttons all have a very satisfying click. On top of these buttons for the top face, bottom face buttons are fantastic. When it comes to that, it just feels higher performance. It feels more premium of a controller. Not only do you know that you're registering by hearing an audible click, but the actual feel of the concave buttons on the right side and your left side D-pad is just really satisfying. The L and R buttons to me seem to take inspiration from the GameCube's Z button. Now granted, that button didn't feel like it depressed as much, but on these specific ones, you definitely get kind of a small window for those presses on the left and right buttons. On this guy, you've got your sync button on the top of the controller makes it really easy for you to sync to the VMU unit that plugs directly into the Dreamcast console. Now, I will say one thing about that whole setup is that the cord for the VMU connector cable and receiver for your controller is really short. You're probably only getting roughly about 8 to 9 inches of cable, and that means it has to sit right next to your console, so you're not in a flat place. I can see that being a problem for some people, but I will say really easy to sync this controller up. One button on the receiver, one button on the top of this controller, and you're instantly lit up on one of 4 different slots that you can have for the Dreamcast. So very easy to do. Love the feel of this thing. The weight is beautiful. The button presses are phenomenal, and the controller just fits in your hand very, very well. So for feel, I also would say we're ready to rock and roll. Last up on this controller is the performance. Now, a controller can look pretty, it can feel nice, but if for some reason it does not register during gameplay, then you are SOL. That is not the case with Retro Fighter's D6 controller. The controller has some of the lowest latency that I have used on some of these wireless controllers in a really long time. The moment that you sync up, you are one-to-one, at least from the most part in my eyes, in getting a register of those buttons. Right when I hook up the Dreamcast, I can easily see that it's moving through my dead clock. And then the game that I chose to test with this was Marvel vs. Capcom, and that is mainly because with that game, it requires a lot of the characters to have quick quarter turns for their moves. You have to use that D-pad pretty frequently, and then a lot of the special moves actually span the X and Y buttons and the A and B buttons together, and you swap your characters out by pressing the L and R buttons together. And so if that isn't registering for you while you're playing the game, then you end up having kind of a bad experience. You start to feel like you're button mashing more just to get your guys to do what you want with it. But in my test on this, just pressing the punch buttons with Ryu, every single button does what I want it to do. This is a 2.4 gigahertz wireless connection, so you should have the fastest speed that this controller can offer. And if you remember the original Dreamcast controller, the controller itself has a lot of fun elements, but when it comes to fighting game, the D-pad is god-awful, the buttons are a little too small, and the triggers are almost offset in the wrong spot on the original Dreamcast controller for long play periods to be very uncomfortable. But with this, every single button is comfortable, placed in the right spot, and you just feel like that performance is there for these games. So when it comes to the usability of the controller, when it comes to performance, I also think this is fantastic. So there you have it, y'all. That is the D6 from Retro Fighters. If you guys like what I got going on, you like my silly content, hit that subscribe button. If you guys have never had a Retro Fighters controller before, I highly recommend them. They make fantastic controllers. They've got the Hunter series, the Defender series, the Battlers for GameCube. Every single one of them are wireless with their own receiver, and I've played with all of them, and I love their controllers. So D6 is just another fantastic controller to add to the repertoire that is retro gaming. So I will catch you guys on the next video, and I appreciate you sticking around.